The arrangement had been made by Pell Aldrin's wife, who had decided that her neighbor on the South Range had not been eating correctly for long enough that the situation required intervention, and the intervention she had settled on was practical rather than intrusive. She would ask Wren Aldiss to bring him a meal. Wren Aldiss was the person she asked because Wren Aldiss was the best cook in the North Callaway County, and because Wren Aldiss was also a practical woman who would not make the meal into something uncomfortable or loaded with implication, and the meal was not meant to be uncomfortable or loaded with implication. It was meant to be a good meal for a man who had not been eating well. His name was Cole Sutter, and he was 41, and he had been running the South Range spread for 14 years, and had been doing it alone for the past 3, since his wife had passed in the spring, and the 3 years of aloneness had been the 3 years they had been. Correctly managed and well-maintained in all the operational respects, and somewhat depleted in the domestic ones, because a man managing a spread alone did not always feed himself the way a man with a full household fed himself, and Cole Sutter had been eating adequately and not well, and Pell Aldrin's wife had decided this had gone on long enough. He had not, himself, thought the situation had gone on too long. He thought about it occasionally and concluded that adequate was sufficient and moved on to the next operational requirement. Because the spread had many operational requirements and the kitchen had fewer than most of them, and the hierarchy of attention had settled accordingly. He was not unhappy. He was a man running a spread at 41 in the 14th year of running it. And the running was the thing, and the running was going well, and if the kitchen was the least attended part of his life, it was because the kitchen was the least operationally critical part of his life, and adequate was sufficient. Pell's wife had decided otherwise. He had not argued with Pell's wife because arguing with Pell's wife about anything was not productive, and also because some part of him that was not the operational part acknowledged that she was probably right. Her name was Wren Aldiss, and she was 36, and she had been cooking since she was 7 years old in her mother's kitchen, and had been cooking professionally, in the specific sense of being paid to cook for households and events, for 12 years. And in 12 years, she had cooked a great number of single meals for a great number of people, and had left after each one, because the arrangement was always the same, which was that she was hired for a specific occasion, and the occasion ended, and she left. The 12 years had given her a knowledge of kitchens that she had not expected when she started. She had expected to learn cooking, and she had learned cooking, but the kitchen knowledge was a different thing from the cooking knowledge, and had accumulated alongside it without her particularly noticing. She knew how kitchens were organized in households of different sizes and different compositions, and she knew what the organization said about the person who had organized it, what they prioritized, what they left to chance, what they had learned from experience versus what they had inherited as assumption. She could read a kitchen in 30 seconds, and the reading was accurate, and she used it to understand the household before she began to cook, because understanding the household was how she cooked food that fit the household rather than food that was generically good. She arrived at the South Range spread on a Thursday afternoon in September with a basket that contained what she had bought at the Dunmore market that morning after Pell Aldrin's wife had asked her the evening before, and what she had bought was what she always bought for a single meal for a man living alone, which was the ingredients for a meal that was substantial and well made and that would leave enough for the next day. Because a single good meal was not the intervention, the single good meal plus the next day's leftovers was the intervention. She knocked at the door, and he opened it, and she said she was Wren Aldiss, and Pell's wife had asked her to bring a meal, and she would need the kitchen for 2 hours. He said he knew who she was. He said, "Come in." She came in. The kitchen was organized in the way of a man who used it functionally rather than comprehensively. The things he used regularly in the correct positions, the things he used less often pushed to the edges, the surfaces clean but not particularly maintained. She assessed it in the first 30 seconds without making the assessment visible, because assessing a person's kitchen in front of them was the fastest way to make the situation uncomfortable, and making the situation uncomfortable was not the purpose of the visit. What the kitchen told her was this: a practical man who cooked without pleasure, which was different from a man who did not cook. Because a man who did not cook left a kitchen that showed the absence, and his kitchen showed the presence of someone who had used it regularly and without inspiration for a long time. The cast iron was well seasoned, that told her he had been using it for years and had learned to care for it even if he had not learned to love using it. The knives were sharp, that told her he valued efficiency and maintained the tools that made efficiency possible. The pantry was organized by category, not by frequency of use, that told her he had organized it once and not revised the organization as his cooking had evolved, or had not evolved. She unpacked the basket and she reorganized the workspace in the specific way she always reorganized workspaces, which was not to impose her system on the kitchen, but to create the space the cooking required within the kitchen's existing logic, and the reorganizing took 4 minutes, and when it was done the workspace was right. She began. He said he could leave her to it if she preferred. She said that was his kitchen and he should be wherever he was comfortable. He said he would have coffee at the table then, if that was not in the way. She said it was not in the way. He sat at the table with his coffee. She cooked. The cooking was the cooking she always did, which was to say it was methodical and precise and organized around the result rather than around the performance of cooking, and the result she was organized around was a meal that tasted like it had been made by someone who understood what the ingredients were for. She did not perform the cooking. She cooked. He watched without watching. He had his coffee and the Thursday newspaper, and he was at the table in the way of a man in his own kitchen who had been told to be wherever he was comfortable. And he was at the table, and he was comfortable. And he read the newspaper, and he was aware of what was happening in his kitchen without directing his attention at it. What he was aware of was this: she moved through the kitchen the way a person moved through a space they understood, which was not the same as a space they were familiar with. She had never been in his kitchen. She did not know where anything was. She had found what she needed in the first 5 minutes, not by asking, but by looking. And the looking had been efficient in the way of a person who understood kitchen logic rather than this specific kitchen, and the understanding of kitchen logic was not the same as familiarity and was in some ways more impressive than familiarity would have been. He was also aware of the sound of the cooking, which was different from the sound of his own cooking. His own cooking produced a specific set of sounds that he had heard for 14 years, and that were the sounds of a man making food that was adequate and nothing more. And what was happening in the kitchen now produced sounds that were in the same category. Chopping, stirring, the particular sound of something beginning to cook in a hot pan, but were arranged differently, in the rhythm of someone who knew what they were doing and was doing it without uncertainty. His own cooking had uncertainty in it. He could hear the difference now, that there was something to compare it to. He was also aware that the kitchen smelled different from how his kitchen usually smelled when he was cooking in it, which was not a reflection on his cooking, but was a reflection on what his cooking was, which was adequate, and what was in the kitchen now was not adequate. And the difference was in the smell. And the smell was the smell of a meal being made by someone who understood what they were doing. He turned a page of the newspaper and was not reading it. This is Dusty Vows, where she came to cook one meal, and he understood everything he needed to understand before the meal was finished. If you want the next story the moment it lands, subscribe now. Then back to the kitchen. The meal took 2 hours. She worked without stopping, and without apparent effort, and without the specific quality that some cooks had, which was the performance of work, the visible demonstration that difficulty was being managed. She was not managing difficulty. She was cooking. She moved from one thing to the next in the order that the things needed to happen, which was the order determined by the cooking rather than by any visible plan, and the order was always correct, which was the evidence that the plan existed but was internal, had been worked out before she began, and was being executed without visible reference to itself. He was aware of this from the table, in the way that you became aware of a quality in a piece of music without being able to name it immediately, as a rightness that you recognized before you understood why you recognized it. He read the newspaper and drank his coffee, and at some point stopped reading the newspaper and was simply at the table, aware of the kitchen, and the awareness was not the awareness of a man watching a woman cook. It was the awareness of a man in the presence of something he had not encountered before, in the specific form it was currently taking. And the specific form was a person in his kitchen who was completely inside the thing they were doing and not performing it for anyone, including themselves. Tell me, when he said it was a significant distance from one meal to the rest of a life and he was asking it anyway, did you hear that he had already decided? That the asking was not a question, but a statement of intention? He was not asking permission. He was saying what was true and asking her to confirm whether it was true for her as well. Leave your answer in the comments. I read every one. Now, back to the spread. He put the meal on the table. It was a roast with the particular quality that roasts had when they had been cooked correctly, which was that they smelled like the thing they were rather than like the effort that had gone into making them the thing they were. There were 2 sides and bread she had made from a starter she had brought in a small jar in the basket, and everything was the temperature it was supposed to be, and the temperature was the thing that told him the meal had been organized from the end rather than from the beginning. Because food at the right temperature at the right moment was the evidence of a person who had worked backward from the moment of eating rather than forward from the moment of beginning. He said it was a very good meal. She said she was glad. He said he meant to ask, was she staying to eat or was she leaving? She said she usually left after the meal was made. She said the arrangement was typically just the cooking. He said the arrangement for this particular meal had not been specified to him in much detail. He said Pell's wife had said she was sending someone to make a meal and had not said more than that. She said the arrangement was whatever he needed it to be. She said she could stay and eat if that was useful, and she could leave if that was what he preferred. He said he would like her to stay and eat if that was agreeable. She said it was agreeable. They ate. She was a good dinner companion in the specific sense that she was not a demanding one. She did not require the conversation to be maintained at a particular level or filled to a particular density. And she was comfortable with the pauses between things that were said. And the pauses were not uncomfortable, but were the pauses of 2 people who were eating a good meal and did not need to perform. The eating of a good meal for each other. He asked her about the bread after the first piece. He said the crumb was different from what he produced, which was close-textured and fine, and hers was open and irregular in a way that he associated with bread from bakers rather than bread from home kitchens. She said it was the starter. She said she had been maintaining a starter for 4 years, and the 4-year starter produced a crumb that a younger starter did not produce because the 4-year starter had developed a specific microbial character that the younger ones had not yet developed, and the character produced the open crumb. And the open crumb was what made the bread worth eating at every meal rather than occasionally. He said he had been making bread for 6 months. She asked what he was doing with the second rise. He said he was leaving it for an hour. She said that was probably too long in this kitchen, which ran warm from the stove, and 2/3 of the time would likely be sufficient. And a slightly shorter rise would produce more structure rather than the collapse that an overproofed loaf sometimes showed at the bottom crust. He said he had been getting collapse at the bottom crust. She said that was the likely cause. He said he would try the shorter time. She said the starter was the other factor. She said she would give him some of hers if he wanted to try it against his current one. because the starter she had used for the bread tonight was a particularly good one, and had been with her since the second year of the 12, and it produced a crumb that a younger starter did not produce. He said he would like that. She said she would bring it by. He said when. She said whenever was convenient for him. He said tomorrow was convenient. She said tomorrow then. He said what proportion of the starter to flour did she use? She told him. He said that was higher than what he had been using. She said yes, the higher proportion fed the loaf more quickly and produced a faster fermentation that was more predictable in a warm kitchen. And a warm kitchen like his would benefit from the faster fermentation because the slow fermentation was where the overrise was happening. He said he had not known the kitchen ran warm. She said she had noticed it in the first 30 minutes. She said kitchens that had a stove positioned close to the primary workspace often ran warmer than the baker expected, and the baker adjusted for the general temperature rather than the workspace temperature, and the workspace temperature was what the dough felt. He said he had been adjusting for the general temperature. She said that was the most common error in home bread making and was the first thing she corrected when she was working in a new kitchen. He said she corrected it in the first 30 minutes. She said the kitchen told her in the first 30 minutes if she was paying the right kind of attention. He said he had not known kitchens told you things. She said everything told you things if you were paying the right kind of attention. He said what had his kitchen told her? She said his kitchen had told her that he was a practical man who cooked without pleasure, which was not a criticism, but was an observation, and the observation was that a man who had been cooking without pleasure for 3 years was a man who deserved a meal made by someone who cooked with it. He was quiet for a moment. He said she cooked with it. She said yes. He said he had noticed. She said she knew. He said he had a question. She said she was listening. He said what was the difference? He said he had been cooking for himself for 3 years, and for 14 years before that with a household, and he had never been able to identify what the difference was between food that was adequate and food that was good, and watching her cook tonight had given him a partial answer, but not the full one. She said the difference was attention. She said adequate cooking and good cooking used the same techniques and the same ingredients and the same equipment, and the difference was not in any of those things, but in the quality of attention the cook brought to the cooking, which was whether the attention was on the result or on the cooking itself. She said adequate cooking was organized around producing a result that satisfied a requirement, and good cooking was organized around the cooking itself, and the cooking itself produced the result as a byproduct rather than as the goal. And the byproduct of cooking that was organized around the cooking itself was always better than the product of cooking that was organized around the result. He said she had thought about this. She said she had been cooking for 12 years and thinking about it for 11 of them, and 11 years of thinking had produced specific conclusions. He said he had a thing to say that was not the usual thing to say to a person who had come to cook one meal and was about to leave, and he was going to say it anyway. She said she was listening. She was quiet in the way of a woman who understood that something significant was coming and was giving it the space to arrive at its own pace. He said he had watched her in the kitchen for 2 hours. He said he had not been watching in any way that was inappropriate. He had been at the table with his coffee and his newspaper. But he had been aware of the kitchen, in the way that a person was aware of something that they were trying not to look at too directly. He said in 2 hours he had understood things about her that he would not have understood in 6 weeks of ordinary acquaintance, because watching a person do the thing they were genuinely good at was the fastest way to understand them, and she was genuinely good at this, and the genuinely good at this was not the cooking, it was the specific quality of attention she brought to everything in the kitchen, which was the attention of a person who was completely present in the thing they were doing and not managing any distance between themselves and the thing. And that quality of attention was very rare, and was the most accurate thing he had seen in a very long time, and the most accurate thing was also the most attractive thing in his experience. She said he had understood all of that from watching her cook. He said yes. He said he was aware it was a lot to take from 2 hours in a kitchen. She said it was not a lot. She said she had understood things about him in 2 hours as well. He said, what had she understood? She said she had understood that he was a man who sat at his own table and let a stranger use his kitchen without hovering or directing or making the kitchen about him, and that quality of not making things about him was also very rare. And she had understood it in the first 10 minutes and had noted it and had been noting other things since, and the noting had accumulated. He said, what else had she noted? She said she had noted that he was a man who stopped reading his newspaper and did not pretend he was still reading it. She said that was a small thing, but was the same underlying quality as the not making the kitchen about him, which was that he did not perform versions of himself that were not the version he actually was, and the version he actually was a man sitting at his own table in his own kitchen on a Thursday afternoon who had found himself no longer reading the newspaper. And he had not hidden that, and the not hiding was the whole of it. He said she had been paying attention. She said she always paid attention. She said it was the thing she did. He said he had noticed. She said she knew. He said Wren, her name, the first time, with the full weight of it, said the way a name sounded when it had been the name of the woman who arrived with a basket and found everything she needed in 5 minutes and made bread from a 4-year-old starter and had been paying attention to him the entire time he had been trying not to look too directly at the kitchen. She waited. I'm not going anywhere. He said it the way he said things he had determined to be true, which was plainly and as a fact and without the management of how the fact was going to be received. He held her gaze. You came to cook one meal, and I am asking you to stay for the rest of my life. And I am aware that is a significant distance from one meal to the rest of a life. And I am asking it anyway, because 2 hours in that kitchen told me what 6 weeks of ordinary acquaintance would not have told me. And what it told me is that I would like to spend the rest of my life in the same rooms as a person who cooks with that quality of attention, and the person who cooks with that quality of attention is you. And I am not going anywhere, as if it were the simplest arithmetic in the world. Cole Sutter, her name for him, said the way a name sounded when it had been the name of the man at the table with the coffee and the newspaper who had stopped reading the newspaper and had not pretended otherwise, and who had let her use his kitchen without making it about him. She nodded once. The matter was settled. The meal was on the table, and the starter was in the basket, and the bread was made, and Wren Aldiss was at the South Range spread, and she was not going anywhere. She had come to cook one meal and she was not going anywhere, and the distance between those two things was one afternoon and a roast and bread from a 4-year-old starter and a man who had understood what he needed to understand before the meal was finished, and the understanding had produced the question, and the question had produced the answer, and the answer was here. And the starter was in the basket, and neither of them was going anywhere. She said she had a condition. He said he was listening. She said the kitchen was hers. He said it was already hers. She said she meant permanently. She said a kitchen that was hers permanently was a kitchen she could organize according to her logic, which was different from his logic, and he should know that before he agreed. He said he had seen her logic in the first 4 minutes, and it was better than his logic, and she should organize the kitchen however she needed to. She said that was the correct answer. He said he thought it might be. She said she also wanted to teach him the bread. He said he had hoped she would. She said tomorrow with the starter. He said tomorrow. He said Wren. Her name, the second time, with the weight that the second time carried, which was the weight of the kitchen and the basket and the 2 hours and the rest of his life. She said Cole. His name, the second time, with the weight of a woman who had been paying the right kind of attention for 2 hours and had decided that the rest of his life was the correct amount of time. They finished the meal. The kitchen was warm, and September was outside, and the starter was in the basket, and neither of them was going anywhere, and the rest of his life was going to be in the same rooms as a person who cooked with that quality of attention, and the person who cooked with that quality of attention was staying, and the matter was settled, and the kitchen was hers, and both of them were staying. The Thursday had been the Thursday it had been. A meal arranged by Pell Aldrin's wife because she had decided her neighbor had not been eating correctly for long enough, and Pell's wife had been right, and the meal had been the correct intervention, and the correct intervention had been Wren Aldiss and her basket and the 2 hours in the kitchen and the bread from the 4-year-old starter. And the bread from the 4-year-old starter had led to the conversation about the second rise and the workspace temperature and the quality of attention. And the quality of attention had led to the question, and the question had been the right question to ask, and the answer had been the right answer to receive, and the answer was here, and both of them were in it. She had been cooking for 12 years, and had finished every meal and left, and this was the first time she had finished the meal and not left. And the not leaving was going to be permanent, and the permanent was the South Range spread in September and all the months that came after September. And all the months that came after September were going to have the kitchen in them. And the kitchen was hers, and she was going to organize it according to her logic, and the organizing was going to start tomorrow. And tomorrow was also when she was bringing the starter, and the starter was going to be divided, and the bread was going to be taught, and the kitchen was going to be reorganized. And all of that was tomorrow, and tonight the meal was finished, and neither of them was going anywhere, and the matter was settled. He had been eating adequately for 3 years, and this was the first Thursday in 3 years that had produced a meal that was not adequate, but was good. And the good was going to be the standard from now on, and the standard was going to be in his kitchen, which was now her kitchen, which was now their kitchen, and the there was the rest of his life, and the rest of his life was here. And neither of them was going anywhere, and the bread was going to be better when the starter was right, and the second rise was shorter, and the workspace temperature was accounted for. And the bread was going to be better every week, and the better was going to be here, and both of them were going to be here for it. And neither of them was going anywhere, and the matter was settled. She had come to cook one meal, and the meal was finished, and she was not going anywhere, and he had asked her to stay for the rest of his life, and the rest of his life was going to start tomorrow with the starter and the reorganization. And the starter was in the basket on the table, and the kitchen was warm, and September was outside, and neither of them was going anywhere. And the quality of attention that had cooked the meal was going to be in the kitchen every day from now on, and the quality of attention that had let a stranger use his kitchen without making it about him was going to be at the table. And both of them were going to be in the same rooms, and the rooms were the right rooms, and neither of them was going anywhere at all. Pell Aldrin's wife had decided that her neighbor on the South Range had not been eating correctly for long enough. And she had been right, and the intervention she had settled on had been the correct intervention. And the correct intervention had been Wren Aldiss with her basket on a Thursday afternoon in September. And the Thursday afternoon had produced the 2 hours and the roast and the bread. From the 4-year-old starter and the conversation about the second rise and the workspace temperature and the quality of attention and the asking and the answer. And the answer was here. And both of them were in it. And the kitchen was warm and September was outside and neither of them was going anywhere. And the matter was settled. The rest of his life had been in the future on Thursday morning and was here on Thursday evening, and the here was the kitchen that was now hers, and the table where he had sat with the coffee and the newspaper and had stopped reading the newspaper. And the not reading had been the first evidence of what the 2 hours were going to produce, and the 2 hours had produced the question, and the question had produced the answer, and the answer was permanent, And the permanent was the South Range spread, and the kitchen, and the starter, and the bread that was going to be better every week, and both of them in the same rooms going forward. And neither of them was going anywhere. And the matter was settled completely, and both of them were staying. And the rest of his life had arrived on a Thursday afternoon and was not going to leave, and neither was she, and neither was he, and the kitchen was hers, and both of them were staying. She had been cooking for 12 years, and in 12 years she had left after every meal, and the leaving had been the arrangement, and the arrangement had been correct for 12 years, and was not correct anymore. And the not correct anymore was here. And the here was the South Range spread, and the kitchen that was now hers, and the table where the meal had been eaten, and the starter in the basket, and the bread that had been made tonight, and the bread that was going to be made better, and the two of them who were going to be in the same rooms going forward, and neither of them was going anywhere, and the 12 years of leaving were behind her, and what was in front of her was the rest of his life, which was also the rest of hers, and the rest of both of their lives was here, and the kitchen was warm, and September was outside, and the starter was in the basket, and both of them were staying, and the matter was settled. And it was enough, and it was more than enough, and both of them were staying. He had been running the South Range spread for 14 years, and had been doing it alone for 3, and the 3 years had been correctly managed, and the kitchen had been adequately used, and the bread had been made every week, and had not been as good as it could have been, and the not as good as it could have been was over, and the over was here. And here was the kitchen, and the starter, and the Thursday evening, and the woman across the table who was going to be across the table from now on. And the from now on was the rest of his life, and the rest of his life was here, and both of them were in it, and neither of them was going anywhere. And the kitchen was warm, and September was outside, and the starter was in the basket, and the bread was going to be better tomorrow, and every day after tomorrow, and both of them were going to be there for every day. And the matter was settled, and both of them were staying, and neither of them was going anywhere at all, and the rest of his life was the right amount of time, and both of them were staying. She had come to cook one meal, and the one meal was done, and both of them were at the table, and neither of them was going anywhere. And the meal that was on the table had been the meal it was, which was the best meal he had eaten in 3 years, and the 3 years were behind him now. And what was in front of him was the rest of his life, with the kitchen organized according to her logic, and the starter divided, and the bread taught correctly, and the workspace temperature accounted for, and neither of them going anywhere, and the quality of attention that cooked the meal was going to be in the kitchen every morning. And the quality of attention that had sat at the table without making the kitchen about him was going to be at the table every morning. And the two qualities were going to be in the same rooms for the rest of both of their lives, and the rooms were the right rooms, and the September was outside, and the starter was in the basket, and the kitchen was warm, and the matter was settled, and both of them were staying, and the kitchen was hers, and the rest of his life was here, and the rest of her life was here too, and both of them were staying, and it was enough, and the matter was settled, and it held.